Welcome to Shaping the NYC Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, David Shamshovich, and I'm here with my co-host,
Brenda Slukowski.
Hello to our Skyliners. We're excited to bring you another bonus episode because...
Bonus episode. I have to say it every time, David. You got to give me a chance.
Today we have a very, 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 very special guest. He's a Academy Award-winning Skyliner, the head of the tax incentives group at Seiden Schein, a man who everybody who listens to this podcast should know by now, Mr. Jason Hershkowitz, the 421A, 485X, 467M genius.
Are we not doing the Star Wars reference anymore? I was going to say he's a Jedi.
He's all things tax incentives.
Amazing.
But I don't think our Skyliners want to hear about that, right? Because we're not here to banter and to make jokes. I mean, sometimes we are. But at this moment, we're getting right into the thick of things.
Yeah.
And today's topic is one that's hot off the presses, which is the new rules that were just released by HPD, the proposed rules rather, in connection with 485X and 467M. And Jason is going to walk us through all the interesting things, the differences between the old program, the 420.
Sure. Before I get into that, though, I do want to point out that I'm one visit away from my 5-timers jacket.
Oh,
so I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to the next one. So as far as these rules go, HPD recently proposed these rules. They are up for comment. You must comment on them if you want to provide comments by November 6th. We at Seiden Schein certainly will be commenting, and we encourage any of our clients or listeners out there who have questions, who want to comment, either comment themselves or let us know, and we can incorporate everyone's comments into our own.
Yeah, it's a good idea. We all work well together, I think. So if you have any comments once you've read it or any questions, ask us. And if you don't want to submit your own comment, we're happy to do that on your behalf, assuming that your question actually makes sense to comment on.
It's a good caveat, I
There
guess.
are no bad comments.
Yeah, only bad people. And we have a reputation to uphold because we are at the forefront of this stuff. And obviously Jason is the person that really knows the most about it. So I just want to kick it into gear and talk about some of the differences between the rules in connection with the old program and 485X. And maybe perhaps we start with the workbook filing and the new rule that requires a percentage of the application fee to be paid at that time, which wasn't the case previously.
Yeah, sure. I think that's actually a good place to start. The rules are based off of the 421A rules. A lot of the rules are similar. A lot of the rules are exactly the same. One of the differences, as you point out, has to do with the filing of the workbook. For those of you familiar with 421A, the program required a workbook to be filed with HPD, which gave HPD the locations and the bedroom types and the rents for the affordable units in the project. And you had to file this workbook with HPD in order to get your affordable marketing started. Under 421A, you filed that workbook. It got reviewed by HPD. Once HPD approved it, you could start your marketing. With 485X, similar, but now HPD is also requiring 25% of the 485X filing fee to be paid when you submit the workbook. So under 421A, you didn't file any fees until after you completed construction. Under 485X, you will have some fees that are due during the construction process.
Yeah, and that those can be significant, right? They range between $3,000 and $5,000 a unit.
Correct.
25% of that could be several $100,000.
Yeah, correct. So the fees for 485X do depend upon the size of the project, and it's per dwelling unit, not per affordable unit, but per dwelling unit in the project. And so for some of those larger projects, the total fee and 25% could be substantial.
And that includes the supers unit, I assume.
It does include the supers unit. That is correct.
And it's non-refundable, right?
Once you pay the fee, it is non-refundable.
Yep.
So that's another thing that is different here in that under 421A, you kind of had the ability to back out really up until completion of construction without really facing any penalty. Here, if you want to get your marketing started, you want to pay the fee. If you decide to back out later on for any reason, you're going to lose that fee.
Yeah, and they want to know that you have some skin in the game. And there are a couple of additional requirements here that show that, right? There's also an applicant registration that has to be filed, which is also not something that was done under the prior program.
That's right. So under the prior program, your first filing was the workbook, which really didn't come until close to the end of construction. You filed the actual application itself after you completed construction. Under 485X, there is an applicant registration that needs to be filed, and that needs to be filed within 6 months of commencement of construction. So you're really giving HPD notice that there is this project that is getting going. There is a project that intends to apply for 485X, and HPD is going to publish that information, put a list together, and they're going to know about your project a lot sooner than they would have under 421A.
Yeah, and so they want to have that information and some additional information they want to have as a result of the new wage requirements that apply if you're in a specific zone or a project of a particular size. You're subject to those wage requirements, those minimums, right?
Right.
So they also require you to provide some kind of notification for those wage requirements as well.
That's right. So one of the biggest issues facing developers when it comes to 485X versus 421A is the increased applicability of the construction minimum wages. For any project that does have a construction minimum wage, they do require notification at least 3 months prior to commencement of construction. So here, not only are we talking about filings while the project is under construction, you're talking about filings being made prior to construction commencing. And of course, both of these filings also come with penalties for failing to comply. With respect to the applicant registration that we spoke about, filing that within 6 months of commencement of construction, if you fail to do that, it essentially doubles the application fee. There's a penalty that is equal to the application fee that you need to pay, and then you'll again pay the application fee once you complete construction. For those projects that have the construction minimum wage, if you do not file the notice at least 3 months prior to commencement of construction, the statute actually calls for two different penalties. The first is a daily fine, and the second, which is a little ambiguous, talks about forfeiting the benefits under this section. Both of those things can't be true, because if you're going to pay a daily fine, if you know you're going to forfeit the benefits, you're not going to pay the daily fine.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
Because you wouldn't be under the program in the first instance.
Correct. So I was kind of hoping that the rules would really address that, but they don't. But we'll continue to seek clarification and make sure that we're on top of all the requirements and what the penalties are for failing to comply.
Yeah.
And just for our listeners, commencement of construction is still defined the same way?
Commencement of construction is defined the same way. For practical purposes, that means getting a valid permit and starting your foundation work, typically through a footing or pile.
Yeah.
Great.
And you also have to file a notice of intent and the workbook, which is basically the same as it was under the prior program. The other question I had was, if you do have a fine where you say double the application fee, does that then cost you the 25% when you submit the workbook, or is that separate?
No, I don't think it affects that, but I do think at some point you're going to be paying the fine for failing to file the applicant registration on time. So whether HPD is going to ask for that entire amount when you file the workbook or that entire amount prior to accepting the full application, that I think maybe looked at. But when you file the workbook, I think you're just talking about 25% of the application fee itself, not the penalty.
Then another big one, right? This new MWBE requirement, which wasn't present before, and there's some questions about how to comply. And then you were actually quoted in a Real Deal article about this, and I want you to talk about that, where the quote wasn't exactly within context or didn't properly frame what you meant.
So for the first time, 45X is requiring an MWBE requirement, which the statute says is reasonable efforts to spend 25% of the project design and construction contracts with MWBEs, minority and women-owned business enterprises. Reasonable efforts was not defined in the statute, so the rules take a shot at defining it. When I was quoted in the Real Deal, I talk about it's a little bit unknown as to how you might comply with these reasonable efforts. Even though it's defined, the term reasonable efforts is defined in the rules, it leaves a lot of discretion up to HPD as to whether or not you've shown reasonable efforts to comply. So when I spoke to the Real Deal, and I indicated that's a little unclear on how you could comply. Really, it's how you can comply if you don't show that you've spent 25% of your contracts with MWBs. If you contract with MWBs for 25% of your design and construction costs, there's no question you've complied. End of story. It's in those instances where you don't show that 25%. How do you show your reasonable efforts? And the rules go through a list of what HPD can look at to determine whether or not you've met that reasonable efforts threshold, but it's still left in HPD's discretion to make the determination. And if they're not making the determination until after you've completed construction, after you've filed, and after you've paid that substantial fee, that is a little bit unsettling to me that, we're waiting until last minute to know whether or not we've met that threshold.
Yeah.
So in the rules, I would like to see a little bit more clarity as to, give me exactly what it takes to meet that threshold.
Yeah, and so just for everybody's benefit, the quote was, there doesn't seem to be a surefire way of complying, and I think that's somewhat problematic. And what you're referring to is there's no surefire way of complying if you hadn't met the 25% threshold.
Correct.
You've clearly complied if you met that 25% threshold.
That's right.
So it's something to be on the lookout, and I'm sure that you will be submitting comments with regard to that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is homeownership has a little bit of a difference here. I just want you to talk a little bit about the differences between homeownership under the prior program and this program, which is different and therefore requires certain different rules.
Yeah, sure. So both 421A and 45X have homeownership options, have a homeownership option. And under 421A, the option required that after completion of construction, all of the units have an average assessed value of $65,000 or less. Didn't matter what the unit sizes were. It's an average assessed value of $65,000 or less. 45X takes the same concept, changes it a little bit, and they talk about a per square foot assessment. So on the one hand, it's good larger units might not be subject to a lower $65,000 AV number. It goes by the square footage of the unit. So it helps in some regard. The issue that I have is that there's no clear definition of what they mean by square footage here. When we deal with affordable housing programs, when we deal with 421A and 45X, there's any number of ways that the city can measure floor area. 421A, 45X have this concept of aggregate floor area, which is really a definition that's kind of unique to these programs, and it's kind of a mix of zoning and gross. You have zoning floor area, you have gross floor area. So
don't forget about net floor area.
Net floor area, when we're dealing with inclusionary housing.
This is why we're employed people.
So I think having a little bit more
clarity
on how we're going to calculate that $89 per square foot would be helpful here.
Yeah, but it's another thing to add to that commentary, and also there's another issue in connection with the timing of the filing of the application for homeownership. So maybe touch upon that as well.
Right. So this isn't a change from 421A, but I think it brings an added level of complexity under 485X. So both programs always required you to file your application within 1 year of completion of construction. Under 421A and now under 45X, HPD requires that there be deeds for all units before you file. So that means you have to have within 1 year of completion of construction, you need to have sold essentially all of your units. Under 421A, it wasn't as big of a problem because 421A only allowed homeownership availability for projects of 35 units or less. So you were, for the most part, talking about smaller buildings. It was still an issue, don't get me wrong, just maybe not as big as the issue I think we're going to see now, because there's no longer a unit limit on homeownership projects under 45X. And there's just no way that a larger project is going to be able to sell all of its units within a year. And so I think...
And we know this because we do a lot of for-sale condos and also homeownership and the affordable space, so we know that it's a very difficult and uphill battle to do it.
Right. So with this post-completion assessed value requirement that we just spoke about, and all of the difficulties in getting a homeownership project eligible for 45X already, which is by statute, it's going to be very difficult for homeownership projects to to be eligible with this set of rules. I still find it disappointing that the city isn't a little bit more open and I don't know what word I want to say, but excited about home ownership projects. I think they should.
They haven't been for a while, although there's been lots of discussion recently about it. Now I want to next turn to the differences between 421A and 45X.
Not really a difference. I just want to make sure I point out that rules relating to unit mix and distribution of affordable units within 485X are the same as 421A. So for those that are used to the affordable housing requirements with 421A, it's going to be similar and the same under 45X.
Yeah, which is, I guess, good news. I'm not sure. It means that we don't have to retrain our brains.
Yeah, I mean,
Less complicated.
to HPD's credit, they were pretty consistent in saying that they will mirror 421A as much as they can, and I think they did so.
485X has now a rule that basically gives, it's similar to actually what City of Yes has in connection with UAP, which is HPD has some discretion to reject projects if it doesn't comply or comport with the intent. Right. Was that something that was exist in the prior rules?
It did exist under the 421A rules. I'm happy to say that, knock on wood, as of yet, I've never...
You've not encountered
I've never had HPD reject a unit mix or distribution or project based on. We're not just necessarily looking to do a minimum. We want to make sure that we are complying not only with the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, and I think that goes to that.
And that's the reason why it's very important to have somebody, not only who's knowledgeable, not only who's an attorney, but someone who's done this thing time and time again.
Yeah.
Which is, we have a history, obviously, of 25 to 30 years of doing this program and others with HPD. So now I want to turn to 467M, which is not very different. Those rules.
Yeah.
It's the office to residential tax incentive. And maybe we could just talk a little bit about the differences or similarities with 485X and or 420A.
Right. So, similar to 485X, the rules for 467M are based off of 421A, and they're very similar to 421A. Some of the differences between 421A and 467M are the same as 485X. You're going to have to file a workbook, and HPD is going to collect 25% of the fee at the time you submit the workbook, just like they will under 45X. I think one thing important to point out is that the 467M statute did not state exactly what the application fee would be. It said that it can be no less than $3,000 per unit, and HPD in the rules is establishing a fee of $3,000 per unit.
No matter what the size of the project,
No matter what the size of the project.
Versus 45X, which it varies $3,000 to $5,000 depending on the size.
Correct.
So they basically mirror
what 467M, what the rules do allow, is an expansion of an existing building and still allowing that building to qualify for 467M. So you're not, even though we're dealing with a conversion, you're not limited to the existing volume or the existing size of the building. You can expand it. And what the rules require is that at least 50% of the floor area in the new project consists of the pre-existing building.
And I think this is an important point, and this goes beyond 467M, but this is how it's going to work if the City of Yes passes and universal affordability preference passes, which applies to both new construction and to conversions. And I assume that they want them to work together, like 485X or 420A work with voluntary inclusionary housing.
Right.
Same thing here. You have UAP. Generally, it applies in most middle and large density districts, residential districts. So you get a zoning bump generally between 20 and 70%, depending on the district you're in, and you can fill the zoning bonus with affordable units. And that in that space, you can have obviously those affordable units for 467M purposes, and do the same unit will serve both purposes. And I think the statutes will work very well hand in hand, assuming that the City of Yes passes in sometime in December. Fingers crossed. But UAP's passing is replacing voluntary inclusionary housing, for those who don't know, changing some things around. And we definitely plan to, let's go back to 45X. And I think this is an issue with 467M as well, is that unlike the prior program for 421A, the units were affordable and rent stabilized for the benefit period. And then afterwards, once they vacate, assuming you have the correct riders, contact us for those riders, then they can exit rent stabilization. They're no longer restricted. That's not the case here necessarily, because they remain affordable and therefore restricted, and HPD has jurisdiction. Can you just let us know how that affects things?
Yeah, sure. So under 421A, as you said, these units were not permanently affordable and rent stabilized. And so that at some point in the future, it may seem like a long way out, but at some point in the future, the affordable units under 421A would become market rate and would no longer be rent stabilized. And when that happens, HPD would have no reason and would have no jurisdiction over those units really anymore, at least with respect to 421A. 485X, 467M now require permanent affordability and rent stabilization for that 20, 25% affordable, whatever is required by the program, depending on the size. And so these rules, the statute permitted it, and the rules include the ability for HPD to continue to monitor the affordability requirements and the rent stabilization requirements of these affordable units even after the 485X or 467M benefit ends.
Okay, so Jason, thank you so much, and I wanted to stress to our audience that Seiden Schein does this kind of work all the time. Please feel free to call us for any advice. If you have any comments, again, please contact us. We're happy to submit it on your behalf.
Yep.
Or to include it. And there's lots of these deadlines, rules, and penalties and fees involved. So you don't want to misstep this.
Yeah.
So, Jason, you are, as always, a wealth of knowledge. We'll stay tuned for the actual rules, your comments, which maybe we'll publish on our website or a LinkedIn post. And for anything and all tax incentives, please contact Jason Hershkowitz. Visit our website. You can get his email.
Help us, help you.
Yep, exactly. And that's a wrap, guys. Enjoy.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@seidenschein.com or visit our website at seidenschein.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@seidenschein.com and Brenda Slakowski at seidenschein.com.
You want to spell that?
B Slakowski at seidenschein.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.